All right, I'll get started because I've got half an hour. I want to just finish it on time so the next speakers can join. My name is Fung. It's my third time here, so I'm almost like old movies. So hopefully, after lunch, you're going to be awake. I was going to do a survey of the audience, but I think I'll do it later. Just not enough crowds. So I'm going to talk about global startups in the age of blockchain economy. And so I mentioned the term a few times earlier. What is global startups? Let me backtrack a little bit. When I first joined the venture business with Advent International back in 1990s, I worked in the Far East group in Boston. So our job is to invest in US firms and then bring it to China and Asia and then build a relationship. We call it cross-border technology transfer. And that was 27 years ago. So when you talk about tech transfer, is really an old concept. It's evolved a lot in the last 25 years. Tech transfer is really not a right thing to say. So if you go to a conference and say tech transfer, don't go because it's really too late for that idea. So what is a global startup? Hopefully you can see that. So there's a way to define it. So global startup are really companies that are founded by entrepreneurs like yourself who want to build a global business. And the business will have operations that span across the world, and it has customers that span across the world. And most importantly, in this day and age, the competition can be from anywhere in the world also. And given our technology focus as a venture capitalist, only talk about tech firms. So don't talk about retail or movies, production, or cultural product like movies and programming like that. I just focus on technology from biotech to TMT to IT components. Now, the drivers for that globalization is really a number of areas. One is just commonly known. Information is now diffused so quickly. In blockchain, it's going to compress a lot faster than internet knowledge base. And as we speak, I know that China, the Academy of Engineering, as people quite involved in global standard forming for blockchain technologies. They're engaged, as we are, as we speak, to create the standard for global blockchain. So did not happen before. Before they tend to be a little bit behind the curve and copy and imitate what we have learned, but it's still going to change. So if you speak, blockchain firms are being developed in China. At least I know 8 or 9 applications that's been built, funded, that are creating blockchain companies. So the diffusion creates this lower barrier to entry also because the hosting is so easily done. The hosting firms in China, they're as strong as US-based hosting firm. So anyone can now build cloud-based applications by just paying to be online versus in the old days, you need to pay a lot of money to do that. So there's one driver. The other driver is really customers who are pulling you. And I'll come back and talk about an example in our portfolio. It's a China-based firm that's now global because the customer pushed them to go outside China. And the third is really supply chain pull. If you're doing anything that's product that need chips, you can design here, but you will find very quickly that 95% of your supply relationships are in China. And so rather than fight back and forth and only have 5 people here go design and the other team are in China, we find a lot of examples where IoT design firms basically uproot themselves and move to Shanghai and create a business in China now. And we see a lot of them coming because of the supply chain pull. I'm working with the MIT spin-out to exactly that. They come up with this innovation, they got a prototype, and then they approach us and say, how do we make this? How do we ship this out at lower cost? How do we export it from somewhere else? Because they don't want to ship it back to Boston and then ship it somewhere else. So it turns out it's all done in China. And so it's going to pull a lot of firms to in China or other regions because of that supply chain relationship. But of course, cost-benefit justifications make you want to go global quickly. But most importantly, it's just really the entrepreneurs who want to be the generation go from somewhere else, going to create business that can be somewhere else because it's just not fun to just targeting US-based customer anymore. So entrepreneurs who want to be in the position to create global startups. In our deal flow, when I first started talking about the concept of global startup 10 years ago with my partner, Michael, there was about maybe 10 to 15% of our deal flow we consider global startups. Now it's about 40%. We expect that in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, it could be 80 to 100% of venture deal flow that are global startups by definition because of the pool in the market. Now, given that it's a blockchain conference, so I'll add a slide on what's the impact of blockchain on global startup phenomenon. As I mentioned earlier in my earlier talks, the key is really the application first. So you got to create a solution that addresses a problem and create a big market for it. If blockchain can add a lot of value to make it happen, then there's a reason to add to it. But given that blockchain is so well known around the world, when you talk about idea that would take this smart contract and distributed ledgers, someone in Israel can do it as quickly as we are, or in Russia, or in Cambridge, Massachusetts, for Cambridge, UK. So you really have to be aware that when you get involved in a new company, you really think about who the next competitors, not in California, but somewhere else. And then your job is to go quickly. You got to really replicate yourself. And I won't cite examples, but there are many cases historically when US firms go to China, they just came in like 3 years too late. Even Apple failed a couple of times on business development because they came in too late, because we built a relationship. And so you really have to go early. Our goal as an investor is when that happens, we can bring you there early and start to build a partnership early in the cycle so that when the time comes, you actually want to strike a deal, or they have 4 to 5 years experience in China. There's a reason why we headquartered Drum Tower Ventures in Shanghai rather than the Valley or Boston, even though we know that our source of deal flow can be from this region or from Boston. But to help our portfolio, we need to be in China to build a relationship locally for them. It won't help if you fly in and just build a relationship as you are, but we are there now to bring in the relationship that we have developed over a long period of time. And so in this new area of digital trust, I highlight that by italic is because it's really changed the whole concept of what data is all about, how data is being used on a blockchain platform. That digital trust turns out make a lot of changes that you don't probably envision at this point. And our goal is to find companies that can take advantage of this component of trust of contents, combine it, there's a word, combining with AI, big data, cloud computing, IoT. Because blockchain itself is a concept of a platform, the component of give you features, but to make applications that is unique and market leading, you got to really talk about convergence. That is a concept that originated about maybe 10 years ago when I went to MIT, and we started to have programs at MIT where you can get joint degrees between mechanical engineering and computer science, or between medicine and IT, or between business and language. And all it's because the next wave of application is really IT is being applied to the rest of the economy, and you take big data, AI, and IoT inputs and analysis to create new applications that cannot be done in the 4th, 5th generation. So conceptually, I would encourage you to think about what you do is don't just look at the platform, look at the component, and how to enhance what's being done. Because enhancement to existing app is just marginal. And you want to be quantum leap above that. When you do a quantum leap above the current concept applications, you can do a lot more. And now, what is that? I don't know. My job is to analyze what you produce. I try to think of like what's the best 5G application beyond the 4G. If you take Didi or Uber, it's a 4G, right? You got a mobile app, you can now link all the cars together, and the person could hold the phone, still have a mobile app application. But if you take one step further, and you take Mobike or OVO, then you got the IoT component in the bicycle now. And you can now, almost like a first generation 5G application, where you take IoT backend, you feed data into a single database. Turns out they do a lot of AI, they do a lot of business development, using analysis of the software to create functions and incentive and business models around the convergence of IT. Now, if you look at how that model is being exported now to China, to US, and around the world, there's that wave of application now is what we see coming out from China. That's really what we all need to worry about, is that the next wave of firms that come from China, there's a business model that we have to now imitate. In fact, I mentioned some earlier, WeChat, if you look at the application, it's really combining eBay, Netflix, and a bunch of stuff together, and it's what we call a super app. Basically, on one application, you can do what we can do here in 4 different applications. Who can think of that? Because he's a CTO at WeChat could just decide to write super apps with everything built in. And that is being now exported, and you will see a lot of copying of that. Now, there's a third wave of company coming out in global startup beyond the first, which is internet-based. Second is really you move to China because of the supply chain requirements. And the third is original firm coming from China now to the rest of the world. And Alibaba and Tencent are the first wave. And I think we have a few that will come out that will actually be observable going shortly. Now, the drivers is really you are the one who want to create it, and they say, you're going to stop you. And so our job is to help you to fulfill your dreams. And it's proven that historically, if you target overseas global market for the first time, you're going to be 2 times better performers than if you take the traditional model of state-by-state expansion around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, it's going to be a bigger percent of the venture deal flow. And so I hope that when you think about your model, think about global startup concepts rather than just a traditional state-by-state expansion. But there are challenges when you think about global startups. Your limited resources are new. How do you think about global market the first day? And then it's hard to figure out how to do it. Now that I have a bigger audience, I can ask a question that I was going to survey earlier. Out of this group who come to the conference, how many actually fly in for this conference from out of the country? There are 3 or 4. There'll be more of those in the future. Now, for those who are from local, how many originally come from somewhere else? So there are about 3 of those. And there'll be more of those. Now, in the old days, you have to move to the valley to do the innovation because the ecosystem's here. But we see what will happen is the home country, they have an innovation ecosystem in place, like I would say Finland, right? Or Israel, or UK, Cambridge. There are many, and Russia. And so they can now do all the same thing without having to live here because of the internet, the communications, the access of information can now, in fact, we talk about cloud funding, crypto funding. All of it can be done over the network now without having to be local. And the Fed organization is going to make it easier. Now, the problem is the VC industry is traditional. And I'm a traditional VC, so I don't think about crypto as quick as some of you are. But if you go to some of the VCs here, even in the valley, they're like 2 hours away. And if you don't focus US market, don't talk to me. Because if there are some that have a Chinese affiliation, they send it to China partners, and they take over from there. It doesn't work. You have to be a partner who is in charge of the firm and help it go global. And try to send to a junior partner in China and help it go global. It doesn't work because they don't have the same interest and incentive as a headquarter venture capitalist. So worse yet, they say, well, you're wrong. And don't listen to that because they're never wrong. It's just a matter of they are wrong in thinking about how to approach the business. So we hope that we are one of the few first firms who actually create a global venture capital model that take care of that global startup concept and help you grow the business. And our job is to learn from you and develop the business together. But we believe 100% that the next wave of innovation have to come from global startups that go global quickly. And how do we help? We are also small ourselves, right? We are a new entrepreneurial startup ourselves. My partner and I have 25 years experience in venture capital. You can go to our website, you can check it out. And I worked in the US and came back to China. My partner worked in the US, one of the early VCs in 1996 in China. And we joined forces 10 years ago. And we are also small. So our goal is to really network as a Fed organization to have the right resources that we can bring in to help you at the right time with the right resources. And since we're early stage investors, we actually frequently will actually just consult with you for a couple of years for free. Just really see how you think, how you receive ideas, how we learn together before we write the first check. We're willing to do that. And in some cases, we're requested by the company to go join them for a year on a part-time basis to help business development. We've done it a couple of times as well. And so our goal is really get engaged and build a relationship. And then at the back end, we're building a lot of white papers and how-to manuals so that as we learn more with the process how to go global, we document it and share it on a best practice basis with the entrepreneurs. Now, I was mentioning there's an example I want to just highlight. Now, this is one I mentioned earlier, where it's a business that is good on its own merit. There's value to be added with what it does, but it's not blockchain driven because it was built 3 years ago. They will look at blockchain being a platform. So what do? It's a Shanghai-based firm. What they do is they have a software package that lets you evaluate employees. Like in the old days, you do resume search, keywords, and say, well, what school, what company you used to work for, what's your discipline, and then you sort out of the 50,000 applicants, 1,000 that you want to actually interview or talk to by phone. But that process we think is unfair. So the new way is use big data, go for analysis to figure out historically, based on the experience, what kind of outcome you produce. And so when an applicant comes in, we give them 10 questions on the mobile phone, they answer it, and then we look at the answer, the word they used, and match it with history on what kind of outcome we can predict their performance would be. And so this is really a new way for being more fair. So this example where we have L'Oreal, which is a French company, who use our software in Shanghai to select employee for customer service. And L'Oreal, being in China, they're willing to give us everything they know about the database of the applicants to us for analysis. There's one advantage of AI in China because data is available without restrictions. And so we go to the analysis, and then we actually source the resume. So there's a third-tier small city applicants who are not in the top-tier school. So you got accepted to be an employee and perform very well. And so under the historical matrix, should be dropped in the first round of cutting. And so we believe that there's a social angle on what we do in such a way that it becomes more fair on employee selection. And turns out another outcome was when we look at the screening, if you look at traditional resume search by people or by keyword, the ratio tend to be tilted towards male. Just the nature of the process these days. In our case, it's 50-50, it turns out, because there's no gender differentiation on how you answer the questions. Now, this firm, with L'Oreal being a customer, 2 years ago, had a $50,000 contract. They asked us to go to Southeast Asia. And then eventually, they get to headquarters. And so they have now 7-figure income with L'Oreal globally because their software is now being used to select employees. And then in the last 2 years, we started to expand overseas. And now 60% of the revenue now are from outside China. And we incorporate the firm into the Netherlands company. And we expect that we can go public now in any stock exchange in Europe or in Asia or in the US. And there's how a global Chinese firm is now being globalized because of the customer pool. We expect that more will be coming from China that way. And we hope that Sidling will be one of the leading firms in the HR space in the next generation of firms. And just a page about us. We focus on early stage companies, and we look for really global startups. And we hope that at this first round of focus, we'll look for a firm that has a strong connection to China because we are there to help you with business expansion and local government relations and understanding the market itself. And we focus on traditional software TMT space. Our goal is to really help you as an early stage investor and bend it in the situation if needed. That's a way to help with the business. And this is my quick introduction of the idea of global startup. So I'll open for any questions. I have 10 minutes. Is the microphone? Okay. Yeah, I think depends on what industry. I think we have to go industry super specifically. So that's why cloud computing is the advantage, right? Because you don't share the software. So for cloud computing, I think you can be sure the IP protection is as strong anywhere. In the old days, when you have software that's on a disk, it's easily copyable. But in terms of business model, I think it's now going both ways. IPO business model is really not defined, right? So to answer the question, our job as an investor is to help the firm with the partners that we can trust. And so we spend a lot of time knowing the entrepreneur, knowing the partners before we write the first check. We spend a lot of time knowing the partners before introduced to our US firms because we want to avoid any problems down the road. And if you walk in the first time and you have 2 months or a week in a big relationship, that's very risky. So our job is, as an investor, to help you sort through some of the partners so that at the end, when it comes to manufacturers or government locations that can help you expand your business, we actually have a priority list we can introduce to you. It's a way to avoid the IP issue that has been perceived to be inexistent. Now, given that said, the next wave is really more like Chinese firms worry about the IP being stolen in the US. I mean, I'm not joking. It has been complaining about that to the government, that Chinese firms' IP is not being copied in the US. So I think to be fair, when the issue is brought up, it's a little bit biased because ultimately it's your job as an entrepreneur, it's your job with your partners to protect yourself wherever you go, even in the valley across the street. And so I hope that answers your question. Okay. Sorry, if you ask the crypto environment in China, there was a session that we spent. Oh, the question was, do I want to talk about the crypto environment in China? There was a session on it yesterday we discussed for half an hour. Show me the hands, how many want to hear the answer again? I can repeat it. But if,
just a one-sentence answer.
If the crypto, as I mentioned yesterday, it cannot produce money that's perceived to replace RMB, and if you are trying to compete with the government on money, it's not clean anywhere in the world, including US, by the way, they'll fight it. And so what I propose is if you can create a unit of exchange that's backed by value, and then you do it as a thing, because the definition of that thing called crypto is different in US versus Europe. ours define it as a thing, so that you pay taxes if you buy and sell, you have capital gains from last year, just in case you have to report it. In Europe, there's no sales tax, there's no capital gain or loss because it's the currencies. So if it's become a thing, then you have accounting rules around it that can actually work. So I think in China, if you want to create some unit of exchange, it's fine, but don't create anything that can compete with money.
So we have 5 minutes for questions, but let's do short questions, short answers. Sorry, can you wait for the mic to come on?
Now I forgot the question. It doesn't seem like American companies have had much success entering the Chinese market. From my perspective, China basically copies the model. You talk about WeChat. If you block Facebook, Google, others from entering the market, they can just create and copy whatever they want. Alibaba copies Amazon, et cetera. So that being a risk for an American company trying to go over there, how do you guys address that problem?
Well, that's beyond my pay rate. I'm not a government employee. I'm not even a Chinese citizen. So I cannot address for the Chinese government. But according to the policy I've read, they do have a preference to support domestic firms. They do have a preference to create global brand companies. They come up with China from the Huawei of the world to CTE of the world to even car manufacturers to airplane. So it's on the game plan. And now, given that said, well, if I were a government like China, why would I want to do that? If I were powerful enough to create my own brand, to be a global player, especially when China has 5 times the population than the US. So if I create any product, they can be self-sufficient for 1.5 billion people, why not? And so I think it's a policy that I have read, or I read, I just repeat for you. If it's right or wrong, I don't want to make a judgment call on it. It's not my job, yeah.
Hello.
Yep.
Yeah, my name is Danny. I'm the founder of a hardware company called Illmatic. And you're mentioning doing trade with China. I recently read an article about new restrictions.
Don't use tech transfer because I'm not here to look at tech transfer companies. I look at global startup that has a global market potential. If you have tech transfer, ask someone else. I'm not interested in that.
I'm interested in the tariffs and restrictions that President Trump is imposing on certain goods and the possibility of those carrying over into electronics and how that might affect, you know.
I can comment on, I can comment on Donald Trump's policy. I can comment on President Xi Jinping's response. It's beyond my pay rate again. But I can address is, one thing to be cautious is if Chinese firm cannot buy American companies, they just create their own. We have received a business plan on the chip designers whose ambition is to create the next Qualcomm, Broadcom in China. And is it doable? Time will tell. But from the market stacks, just in case you don't believe it, I've seen slides that says the electronics market is going to be 3 times bigger than today globally 15 years from now. And there will be a lot of need for 80% of those customers could be low in supply because the hardware is too expensive. And this is all advantage for China. So this firm thinks they can create the next Broadcom supplying to 80% of the companies of the world who need the low-end products. So is it doable? Time will tell. But there's a risk the US runs by not allowing business relations to be developed across the countries.
Hi. So when you're uniting the world, how do you unite everyone culturally? You know, because I see a lot of balkanization in the whole decentralization movement, right? You have different countries who speak a different language. You know, how do we become one? How do we unite everyone?
Right. I personally do my part. I travel around the world 6 times a year to all the conferences I need to go to build friends. My LinkedIn network is like all over. It's my preference. But it's really ultimately your upbringing, I think. How you got brought up as an individual, how your personal culture affect how you become a global citizen. So just think about the global citizens beyond global startups. I think it's a way to think about it.